welcome our moderator for today's panel, Risha Noyuk, the partner at Nixon Peabody LLP. And over to you, Risha. The floor is yours.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful panel. I am Richa Noyuk. I'm a partner at Nixon Peabody, which is a 650-person law firm, full-service law firm. We do everything from IP to transactions to litigation, labor and employment, you name it. My practice is corporate transactions. I handle everything from mergers and acquisitions to startup law. A big chunk of my year is spent raising capital, helping my clients raise capital, early stage, seed stage, and upwards. We have the benefit of a stellar panel here. So without further ado, I will introduce or ask my panelists to introduce themselves. Can we maybe start with Esther?
Good afternoon. Very briefly, I'm the executive founder of Wellville, which is a 10-year nonprofit project working in 5 small US communities. And our goal is to make healthcare unnecessary because everybody will have the asset of health. However, that's not going to happen in the short term. So with the other half of my time, I'm an investor in a lot of interesting startups, many of them in the field of healthcare and digital health and so forth.
Thank you, Esther. David, tell us about yourself.
Hey, hello, everyone. My name is Dave Colon. I'm the CEO of Jove Equity Partners. We're a family office based in New York and Colorado, and we focus on starting and building companies, and some of which are in the healthcare space. I've served on the board of 3 privately held healthcare companies, and was the co-founder of one of those, which is called Bridge Health and Bridge Health Medical. And that was a surgery benefit management company that we founded about 10 years ago, focused on creating consumer choice within the space of procedures and surgeries. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation today and the exciting space that is healthcare investing.
Thank you, David. Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me this morning. I am a principal with Spiro Ventures. We are an early stage venture fund that invests in mission-driven founders across 3 core areas of focus: well-being, work and purpose, and human connection. Health and wellness has been a key area of focus for us for the last 3 years or so since we launched. And we continue to be really excited about opportunities at the intersection of consumer health, well-being, and also innovations in the bio and life sciences industries. We have investments across the spectrum of from mental health to parenting to human mobility. So really excited to have the discussion today.
Thank you, Sarah. So our topic for the day is trends in healthcare investing, and what we're going to look at is a little bit of what we're seeing today, and looking into the crystal ball as to what that means for the coming years. So 2020, an unexpected year that's been. When I look back into 2020, which I try not to do because who needs to look into that again, but when I do look into 2020, one of the silver linings actually has been sort of how we have, as a community, utilized technology to meet some of these challenges. Be it testing or monitoring testing, or working from home and making that possible, or if not seamless. And health tech has been no exception. If I sort of look back at the year, at all stages of the health tech ecosystem, the early stage investing, the early stage capital raising didn't really dry up, which is what we were starting to fear and expect in kind of March, April. The M&A activity continued strong, which speaks well for sort of future roll up and future add-on acquisition opportunities. And SPACs, the re-emergence of SPACs, special purpose vehicles, which can potentially in the future provide an additional route of exit through public acquisition, altogether, I think has sort of left the health tech space in a healthcare as well as health tech space in a good place for 2021. So let me ask the panelists, maybe keeping the same order as the introduction, starting with Esther. What if we sort of look at the last couple of years, if 2019 was the year of getting health records onto the blockchain, and if 2020 was the year of the SPACs, what do you think is 2021? What trends are you seeing today that you think will be relevant in the post-recovery, post-pandemic era?
Okay, so the one that's totally obvious is everything's going digital. We're now, worrying about reimbursement for telehealth, and I think like everything, there's going to be a certain struggle, but some of those things are just going to be permanent. Doctors will be able to prescribe opioids more easily, ironically, and at the same time are much more aware of the dangers of doing so. What I think is probably somewhat less noticed is really, so I was on the board of 23andMe. I love exotic devices and radiopharmaceuticals and stuff like that. But really, I think 2021 is the year when we discovered the importance of health. It's not just, for rich white people, it's something that protects you against things like coronavirus. It's something that helps you if you, the disparities, the inequities in health, not just care between poor and minority people and the rich people of all kinds are just much more visible. And, we're not going to suddenly fix everything, but I find people are much more interested in hearing about Wellville now than they were a year ago. They just understand how horrible it's been for people not like them. Separately, the people who died from COVID-19 are gone, and that's a tragedy. The people who suffered from it are still with us, whether those are the long haulers who have all kinds of basically chronic fatigue syndrome and other things like that, the people whose mental health was impaired, victims of domestic abuse. Again, some people committed suicide and many others have gone through trauma that will be hard to recover from. So what I would love to see is both a government that started subsidizing healthcare workers, including childcare, maternal support, that kind of thing, beyond healthcare. And also, I think there's going to be huge markets in training care workers, in delivering care, in online therapies of various kinds. And we need to do a repair job that's not Band-Aids, but actual long-term repair and recovery of the health of this country.
That's great.
I'm trying to be brief.
Yeah, no, it's fabulous. I love how you brought sort of the societal element, because you're absolutely right. These aren't silos. What happens in society and the politics does impact our health and vice versa.
Yeah.
Sarah,
and actually, just to be clear, one other thing. I mean, I would much rather have the private sector do this and be paid by the government than have the government trying to do it the way is happening now in so many areas of the vaccine. I'd much rather have CVS or Amazon do that than some local government. Let's be real.
Interestingly, I was looking for coriander on Wegmans, and you put in CO, and you can actually order a COVID vaccine. It says when it becomes available for distribution, but apparently you can put it in your shopping cart.
In your own box, and you can assemble it yourself.
There you go. So your wish may be answered, Esther. Your wish may be answered. Sarah, what about you? What do you see?
Building on what Esther said, which I think is really a very important macro perspective to keep in mind. I think public health has been filled with externalities, for all time, and I think what this year has brought into focus for so many of us is that we have a role in mitigating those effects and managing those externalities for our own benefit as well as for the benefit of our communities. And so I think three themes that I've been thinking about are consumers, and citizens are the quarterbacks. I mean, we've been more and more empowered over the last decade, but I think, this year has really put into stark focus the extent to which we have to manage our own care, our own, role in our community's health and well-being. Our typical sort of primary care interactions have often been cut short. We're exploring new offerings, digital offerings, whether it's from our traditional providers or new ones like Walgreens and CVS and direct-to-consumer companies. I think along with this, our expectations of those providers are getting higher and higher. Scheduling a COVID test from CVS is a click of a button, and to do it at my local hospital requires phone calls and being on hold and some sort of automated system, which is a real pain to navigate. So I think across the board, we see those expectations coming up. And alongside that, I think COVID has also brought into great focus for us the importance of community and connection in healthcare provision, in sort of the preventative side of health. We've been through a few waves of this across the health tech ecosystem, and I think now is a time when we need it more than ever. And we see some really exciting opportunities building with community at the center, as opposed to sort of an add-on Facebook group or something like that. And then lastly, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but mental health across the continuum of acuity. I think this year has also really resonated with a lot of us, the extent to which someone can go from seemingly fine to struggling in a very short period of time, and without the same sort of social supports that we're used to, can really end in a sort of a dire situation for that individual. And so resources for that to serve that need are more abundant. There's less and less stigma, but our ability to match people with the resources that are available, I think, is a big area of great need. So that's what I'm looking at.
There's a couple of trends already starting to emerge. David, what do you think?
I very much agree with what Esther and Sarah said in terms of the impact that this last year has had on everyone, kind of all of us recognizing, particularly those of us who've been in positions of privilege, the tremendous disparities that exist in our healthcare system. And I think it's really there are governmental solutions to this, but as Esther started to allude to, there's real private sector opportunity here for, our entrepreneurs and our budding entrepreneurs to address these kinds of disparities that we've seen that have always existed, to be clear, but just to those of us who are more, in places of privilege that haven't necessarily seen those disparities in our day-to-day, having them broadcast to us, having us understand, the impacts of the challenges of our healthcare system have, particularly on those of lower incomes and lower socioeconomic status. I think there's an opportunity for the private sector and our up and coming entrepreneurs to address some of those disparities. And I think that's going to be something that is going to be critically important, that we have, great people with great ideas hitting the ground and trying to solve some of those disparities. And then we're going to need investors to understand that that's an opportunity, not only an opportunity for a financial return, but also for an opportunity for us to improve our society and improve our healthcare system. To be able to investing in these sort of startups that'll come out that address some of these disparities that we've been seeing. I also agree with something Sarah said. I think all of us are interacting with our healthcare system so much more in this last year, and I think that is a trend that's not going to go away. Hopefully, COVID will die off as the most immediate cause of that interaction. But I think people are more and more needing to realize that they have to be advocates for themselves in the healthcare system. I think you're going to see increased emphasis on consumer empowerment. I mean, just the fact that every morning when my 3 kids get up, we got to take their temperature, and then we report that to their schools. All 3 of them are attending in person. that's something we're doing every day. So we're doing something that we've never done before, interacting with our own health, our own family's healthcare every single day. People are getting tests. My daughter's homesick with a sore throat today. I spent a little time on hold with the New York State Department of Health earlier this morning to get her a COVID test. She needs to get a COVID test to go, a negative COVID test, or to go back to school. So we're all getting this testing mode. We're all in this, diagnostic mode. We're all in this trying to figure it out ourselves, reading a lot of things online. So I think people are an important trend is going to be, how do people become more and more empowered consumers, and what companies can emerge that can continue or to tap into that people's knowledge base, that now of their involvement with their own healthcare is far more tangible than it was just a year ago. So I think that's a real opportunity for entrepreneurs and investors.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the data, I mean, when we're taking our temperature, twice a day before we go anywhere, we're creating a whole, system of collecting ongoing personalized data, and how can someone monetize that?
And there's all sorts of privacy issues that go with that too, right? So that's another whole issue.
You are speaking words from my language here, but yes, exactly. A couple of things I wanted to pick up on, which segues very nicely to our next question. So one of the things that sort of I always struggle with, I've always had a practice which sort of combines the for-profit, not-for-profit social enterprises, tech startups, and one of the challenges has always been, when you've got a startup that fits in multiple buckets, there's multiple buckets of investors that they're potentially seeking investment from, and the story and the narrative, and it's the same company, it's the same product, it's the same projections, but which element is discussed first, and how do you frame it in the pitch deck, all of that changes based on who you're talking to. And that's really, to me, been a challenge. And now when I look at what the three of you said, all three of you talked about sort of the societal disparities, how that has to be addressed. These are social enterprises. What advice do you have for our investors who are listening in terms of what can they be doing to sort of access these undervalued, underfunded areas that in some ways are opportunities, and in some ways requires investors to go maybe a little beyond their comfort zone. So to put that long question in a question format, what are the areas that you're seeing, if any, that are undervalued, ripe for investment and growth right now? Maybe in reverse order. Let's start with David this time.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think most healthcare investors have at least some part of this. We do this for societal reasons, right? I mean, there's lots of ways you can invest in all sorts of things that, with many different sectors. But I think obviously people invest to make money and to support, entrepreneurs. But I think part of that is, for all of us who invest in this space, is somewhat related to the fact that when we have a company that's successful, no matter what we're investing in, right, we're moving the ball forward in terms of human advancement, helping people in their lives, whether it's new drugs, new cancer drugs, whether it's new techniques, new ways of accessing care, et cetera. For investors, I think it's simply just continuing to broaden your horizons in terms of what you're looking at. I think one of the challenges for those who are more maybe are addressing those disparate areas is making sure that you're looking at the getting down in the grassroots a bit. I mean, a lot of these companies addressing these underserved areas aren't necessarily the ones who are coming up and percolating up into the venture level, right? So, I think you got to be looking at like kind of that angel net level, looking at getting involved in your angel networks locally. And a lot of the universities actually have a real mandate for that. I judged a competition was put on by Hofstra University last year, which was focused on healthcare disparities. I think they may do it again. Other universities may do this as well, but, trying to help small businesses that are starting up, looking at these sort of maybe more niche areas or more perhaps underserved areas, right? And so I think it's incumbent on investors in this space to really kind of get down into more of the grassroots, because that's where a lot of these companies need to be lifted up. And I think there's a lot of great opportunities there. So that's obviously important.
That's a great point. It's sort of like you know, back when we were seeing Bitcoin, you know, there was a whole influx of Bitcoin companies, and the real value maybe was not what was floating to the top. So how, you know, how do you get down and find the real value? Sarah, what would you say?
You know, to build on what David said, I think reflecting on my own journey as an investor in the health tech space, I think it's full of a lot of scary topics for a traditional venture audience. There's hardware, there's a ton of regulatory, you know, tape and process. There's brick and mortar interactions. There's high sort of labor intensity stuff. And I think there's a real, you know, kind of fortunate or unfortunate education curve that people have to come up in order to really understand which of those elements is required at what point in time, and what ultimately makes for an interesting sort of venture scale opportunity. You know, as investors, we're sort of obsessed with the question of how does this scale? And so I think, you know, both from a startup and a venture audience, that's one of the most important questions. And frankly, if some of these sort of scary elements are required and there's a good answer for how you're going to surmount the obstacle of creating a, you know, an in-person interaction or, you know, a hardware device or something like that, I think, you know, it's our responsibility to listen, you know, ask those questions, listen to the answers. You know, and I think one way I approach it is really asking the entrepreneur, like, what is the value you're creating for the users? And then how does that translate into economic value that you can capture? One area, as I mentioned, that I've been really excited by is the concept of sort of new patient communities. And there have been a couple of business models attached to those over the last, you know, decade or two. And, you know, but they're challenging. And I think, what we need to do is sort of, you know, re-educate ourselves or ask the question of how do you actually capture the value from the, you know, the community and interaction and benefit that you're creating. You know, and sort of look for novel answers, because, you know, the ecosystem is changing and people are willing to pay for things that they may not have been a couple of years ago. So that's how I'm approaching it.
Yeah, good point. Capture the value and then translate it in a form that makes sense for the payers. Absolutely. Esther, what would you add?
So Sarah said we should give novel answers, and I'm going to give one. So I'm in the lucky position of being an angel investor. I invest my own money. I'm not responsible for anybody else's. So I can take risks, and, you know, I lose money, but I don't need to apologize to anybody. And, you know, what you two guys said is totally right for people who are managing other people's money and stuff like that. For someone who's freer, basically, I've learned more since leaving college. You know, I've trained as a cosmonaut. I've gone to 80 countries. I've had 2 or 3 careers. I was a fact checker for Forbes. I know how to ask questions. And angel investing is one of the best educations you can get. For $25,000, you can get immersed in, you know, a particular solution to a particular problem you knew nothing about. And if you lose all your money, you got a really great education. And every once in a while, you actually make money on these things, and that funds the rest of your education. In terms of picking things, you know, I don't know what's going to turn out okay. It's especially at the angel stage, you know, 9 out of 10 of them fail. So if you're going to make a bet and you really don't know what you're doing anyway, why not bet on a minority person? Why not bet on somebody whom you can help? Because your money, you know, at a later stage, your job is to pick great companies. As an angel investor, really your job is to help great companies emerge. And, you know, it's like there's 10 companies. If you help one, that company actually is more likely to be successful. So you're picking the one you want to help, not just the one you think will succeed regardless. And, you know, I've ended up with more money than I started. And I am so much smarter now, although, give me another 20 years, I'll be amazing. I pick things where the founder has a heart. Probably the worst thing you can tell me is I've always wanted to be CEO. The best thing you can tell me is I see this problem. I think I know how to solve it. But if I'm wrong, I'll learn and I'll figure out a better way to solve it. And if somebody else is going to be a better CEO than I am, I'll go back and be the science officer or the chief marketing person. My job is to solve the problem, not to become CEO. And those are the people I like. And, whatever the financial returns, and I do care about them, it's just the most meaningful, amazing work I could imagine, except for the other half of my life, which is the nonprofit.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of looking at it, and you're both lucky and to have the resources to do that, and people who come across you are lucky in that you have that interest. So that is great. Interesting. So the one thing I wanted to pick up on what you said is this whole idea that I mean it's been said 100 times, so I'm not saying anything new, but you're at the really early stage. What you're investing in is the founder, not as much the concept, because the concept will pivot into something that is appropriate to meet the needs that it's been created to meet, but you don't change the driver behind it. So I do agree with you. I do agree with you there that's sort of your first point of diligence. What about and maybe you'll start with Sarah this time. When you're doing this sort of diligence, or when you're going into these areas, so we've just told our investor listeners, go into areas that stretch your limits a little bit, bet on founders. What are the red flags as they're doing that? What should they and Esther mentioned one of them. Someone says, I've always wanted to be a CEO. that may not be the right driver, but what do you see, Sarah, as the red flags as you're kind of going into maybe uncharted territory?
Sure. I was thinking about this question this morning, and I think Esther's is one that's worth, sort of repeating, which is, I like to think of it as I'm investing in someone who can't not do this thing. They're so obsessed, and their whole life has sort of been building up to this being the thing that they're going to do. There's usually a thread that's, come up sometime in their early life when this idea sort of sparked in them, and, they've been sort of maybe even unconsciously building toward it. And I think that's the exact type of person that I like to back, because they're committed to it. They're irrationally committed to it, frankly, more so than I, as the investor, could ever hope. And I think that's the exact profile of someone who's going to do what it takes to figure it out and raise the money, go through the sort of lean moments that all startups endure to build something meaningful. So I think that's the number one thing. And if that thread is hard to find, or you have to ask the question too many times to get sort of that answer about why are you doing this, I think that's a red flag. The other flag that I would share is, I think there's as investors, we're kind of intellectual and theoretical about these business opportunities, and the payment model that might lead to a certain set of things that entrepreneurs will build. And I think that's great. You need that top-down perspective, but I also need like the bottoms up. And I really will look to the entrepreneur to tell me, who are your customers? What do they want from you? Why are they willing to pay for this? And if they don't have a good answer, or they say, oh, like, I'm not even really sure who my customer is, I have 3 different stakeholders, and they each have a slightly different interest in what I'm doing, I think that can be a flag. I really like to see a tight connection between what I'm building and what my customer is expecting and value I'm creating. I think this sort of gets into what I would advise an entrepreneur to do, which is like, talk to your customers all the time, collect as much data as you possibly can, and make sure you know who you're building for.
Yeah, very, very good point. The flip side of that, so when you what we always struggle with. So I work a lot with on the startup side, less on the investor side. So I'm speaking with that hat on. But what my clients are always being told is either you need to focus on the payer who's going to pay for it, or if you're talking about the sort of consumer driven side, focus on the employer side. And what you're saying is it could be any of them as long as it makes sense and you have the story and you have the data to back it up.
Right. Right. And I think the thing with health, I mean, it is complicated because who pays and who consumes the service are often not the same, stakeholders, perhaps don't even know each other's name. But making sure that, like I said before, the value you're creating for your user ultimately will translate into, whoever the payer is looking for. And it's a tough, needle to thread, I think, but being close to the customer and making sure you're tracking the value you're creating is an important step.
Yeah. We have a question. I want to go back to the red flag question for David and Esther as well. We have a question in the chat that I wanted to bring up at this point because it sort of ties in. So the question is, in community-based model of care, one of the things that the question poser hears is that the focus should be on chronic conditions rather than single patient populations. Any thoughts from any of the panelists?
I'll jump in here. I would say that, lots of different business models work. Customer pays, employer pays, insurance pays. Each startup needs to figure out what is my particular advantage. I used to work in the insurance industry, so I'm going to go for insurer pays, or, I've got this compelling consumer proposition and I know how to get them to pay. We're going after a market that can pay. It's in the same way we should deal with chronic conditions. We should also deal with individual problems. And it's each individual entrepreneur needs to know what they are best suited to doing. On the red flag thing, I just wanted the story of the two Elon Musks. People don't know this, but there are two Elon Musks. There's the crazy guy who runs Tesla. And, he tweets, he gets in trouble with the SEC, he smokes dope, I don't know what. And then there's the guy who he's CEO of SpaceX, which is a very well-organized company. It delivers products to NASA, it gets the government to pay. And it's because he's got Gwynne Shotwell there as COO. And, I have no inside information, but I imagine her sitting him down and saying, now, Elon, we're going to go talk to a government official. Just keep your mouth shut and follow my lead. And he does. Virtually every startup founder should have that person that has their back, but isn't trying to get their job, that they trust. And if they don't trust people enough to have that kind of person around them, there's going to be a problem, whether it's Adam Newman at WeWork or Elon Musk at Tesla, which is worth a lot of money, but is still, I would say, a fragile company. People who are willing to learn and to hire people smarter than they are is really what you're looking for.
So interesting you say that. I was just at a client's board meeting earlier this week, and that was a theme that came through. Is the founder said, I need someone who, when I wake up at 2 o'clock because I'm worrying about something, I know he or she is also up at 2 o'clock worrying about the same thing. And I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that we hear very often in single founder companies is get a co-founder, whether it's a technical co-founder, operational co-founder, whatever it is. Of course, then having a co-founder comes with its own issues, because as you grow and your cap table gets further diluted, you've got, by your B or C round, you've got each individual co-founder is down to sort of, high double digits, high to mid double digits of ownership. But leaving that one aside, going back to the red flag question, David, thoughts? What should people absolutely worry about?
Yeah, as an investor, I mean, I think it's been somewhat mentioned, but I mean, certainly you want to see the passion, because I've never been involved in a company that's been successful that didn't end up at a different starting spot, the different place in its starting spot in terms of its product. You're always going to have, pivots, and you're always going to have sort of these obstacles to overcome. And so someone who really cares, not just about, making money, but actually solving the problem. And so you need that passion, that's going to get them through, because there will definitely be moments in every startup that I've been involved with where there's the question: do we continue? Should we continue? Can we figure this out? Is this an existential problem? And oftentimes it is. And you need someone who's going to be someone, or a group of people who have the passion to be like, I don't care, no matter what, we're going to figure this out. And so that passion, needs to be evident as an early stage investor, particularly at that earliest stage, the angel sort of stage, where you have, as Esther said, the highest risk of things, not working out. You need to have people who are just going to, no matter what, figure it out. But corollary to that is you need people who can have enough expertise in the industry, I would say, to be able to figure it out. I mean, you need to be able to pivot to something, and you need to know enough about your industry. So I would say you need, ideally, you need people with deep passion, but also some experience in that niche, whether it's, they had a personal experience with it, or have worked in that area and saw a better way to solve things. Those are the kinds of things that I think stand out. And if you don't see that, I think those are sort of red flags about, is this entity built, and are its founders built to overcome the rough seas that are definitely going to be ahead of them?
That's a good point. We are running out of time, but maybe I can ask everyone to maybe, if you had one piece of advice to an investor who's starting their health tech investing journey, and/or a founder who is just setting up, what would that one piece of advice be? Maybe Sarah, let's start with you.
I've been thinking about an idea. I'll be really quick here recently, about a business that grows the pie, truly creates more abundance for everyone, and one that's just about sort of reallocating an existing pie. And I think the former is much more compelling from an investment standpoint. And I think the latter can become the former. And I would think about, both from an investor standpoint and a startup standpoint, how do you create more, create abundance, create, a bigger pie, and monetize it, that's important, but create sort of a better world. Frankly, that's what we at Spiro are investing in. And those are the kinds of businesses we get most excited about.
I love it. Esther, what would you say?
Do not underestimate the friction, the mess that is health and healthcare. The laws of economics, even the laws of incentives, don't always apply. There are the laws of inertia and entropy. And the thing is, I once said this, it's a calcified hairball, and it is worth trying to fix it. But the fact that something makes sense doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. And you need to operate within those constraints, but you should never give up. I mean, you might give up on a little thing, but don't give up on the whole mission.
Yep. That is great advice. David, what's your one piece of advice?
I would say for investors, I would say, looking at these sort of emerging trends that we've been talking about, empowered consumers, how do you kind of leverage that and give them more tools to make sense of the healthcare world, that they are going to be more and more individually making choices about their healthcare. I think that's a huge area. The other area I would say that for investors we didn't mention, but I think it's incredibly important, even more important than ever, is mental health. All of us, every single person has had all, personally, all of us have had, mental health stress as a result of, the last year, some of course more acute than others. But I think people are understanding the importance of mental health, and that's another area of investment that I would definitely look at. And I would generally agree with Esther. My message to founders would be, don't give up. your investors need you, but more importantly, society needs you to move the ball forward so we can progress. And so you are the future, and you are the future of this most critical area of our economy. You think of all the inventions and all the innovations that have happened in the last 5-10 years, the fact that we have vaccines as fast as we do, none of that would have happened without entrepreneurs putting their heads down and saying, we got to get this done, even when the going got tough. So please keep moving, keep fighting, and we're all rooting for you. Thanks.
Great advice. Great advice. Thank you, panelists. This was extremely illuminating for me. I hope also for our audience. I'm afraid I see some great questions here, but we are not just out of time, but beyond time. So please reach out to any of us offline, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Over to Emma.
You
Great.
can
Thanks
write
a
to me
lot,
at
Risha, and all of our panelists. You guys have been absolutely incredible. On behalf of all of our guests today, we sincerely thank and appreciate all of the wonderful insights and perspectives shared by you guys. Couldn't really be here without you, so thank you so much for sharing that knowledge.